India, South Korea, Russia, Turkey, Brazil, Mexico, Argentina. In a study carried out by the Economist Intelligence Unit, leading executives of global companies stated that the demand originating from those emerging countries is not one of those, but the most important force shaping the global business today. So that's clear, the awareness is there. But the question is, how well do we know, how much do we know about the differences of those emerging markets? And most importantly, how well are our organizations prepared today to cope with the threats on one side, and on the other hand, to capitalize on the opportunity in those emerging markets. And these are some of the questions that I would like to discuss today, briefly discuss, because we've got 45 minutes only for very complex questions, and we've got a very competent and honorable panel here today. Let me introduce the different panelists, starting with Vanessa Moriel. Vanessa is the Managing Director for Asia Pacific with Ames International and a well-respected and experienced executive search expert. Vanessa. Then we have Jürgen Gessler. Jürgen is the Group CEO of Porsche Design Group. We saw Porsche today as being one of the most respected brands, but there's Porsche Design as well, different business, so we're very happy to welcome Jürgen with us today. There's Peter Au. Peter is from Hong Kong, representing the Senior Vice President, famous jewelry brand, Lorenzo Enzo Jewelry. Welcome, Peter. And there's, last but not least, Anson Bailey. Anson with KPMG. You see the studies outside, you've heard something. We're very happy to have you here as a very important expert. So, I would like to start by having a first look at the difference of business in emerging markets versus developed markets. So my first question goes to Jürgen from Porsche Design Group. Jürgen, when you compare the business that you're doing in Germany, very well developed market, compared to what you experience, what you're facing in emerging markets, what are the differences in terms of challenges? What's specific to those emerging markets from your perspective?
So, I believe always that the definition of the emerging markets in the older sense, we should really throw over the border, because if I look on the presentation this morning, then we can clearly see that with the online, I believe, for example, Germany is an emerging market in the online business. China is not an emerging market in the online business. This is number one. Number two is, if we look on the different target groups, what's coming up. So Mr. Brancini talked about saturated European luxury buyers, and the US, they are coming, the new buyers up. So if I look on the worldwide global business, so I have in every market a kind of emerging market situation in the old sense. This means challenges which are different all over the world. So for example, in Germany, online is very difficult right now, because the German buyers are not used to buy online. They are more going to the stores. In China, it's quite the opposite. And therefore, let's say, if we look on the challenging for Porsche Design and for the worldwide luxury group, I believe we should really look on the different market, on the different target groups, and the different kind of business and categories. Just one example, a few years ago, the car company Porsche, they did a few hundred cars in China. Last year, 2011, it was nearly 25,000 units. This means China is now the number 2 market for Porsche, by far over bigger than the German market for Porsche. And a few years ago we would talk about emerging markets for China. But this is the sense that the market are changing so quickly that it's difficult and dangerous to talk about emerging markets in the old sense.
And do you agree with this perception that the concept of emerging market makes no sense? Look at those different channels.
Yeah, thanks, Christian. I agree with Jürgen. I think we talk about emerging markets, but I think the interesting thing about emerging markets, and last month I was actually in Brazil, and there's a lot of talk about some of these other markets like India and Brazil, of course, the BRICS economies. But I think the interesting thing about the emerging markets, if you want to put China in that group, is that there is the ability to do things differently. Perhaps sometimes the norm does not apply to some of these emerging markets. And I think in particularly in China, what we've seen, I think John being here in Shanghai, I know that talking to our clients and talking to those brands, I think there is perhaps a willingness to do things differently. And I've certainly seen that with our clients as well, Christian, the fact that with emerging markets, it is not the norm. Let's throw the norm out of the window. But I think that's very interesting, because what we are now seeing with brands is that brands themselves are being a little bit bolder about what they do here in China, for example. You know, they are trying new things out. And we talked about the online experience. And I think the interesting thing about online is that today you look at the internet population here in China, 450 million plus internet users. And people have embraced the internet, and they've really gone online, and they've done a heck of a lot of research. So today, it's interesting when we talk about the emerging economies, Christian, then we have to be a bit careful. But the one thing that I've seen, certainly the brands over the last couple of years, is that they've thrown the norm out of the window, and we're starting to see people do a lot of different things and experimenting, perhaps in these emerging markets.
But let's build a little bit on these cultural differences and similarities. If you look at the different markets, right, in Asia and Latin America, even if you look at the new upcoming channels, the web, mobile application, and so on, where would you say there are similarities across different cultural contexts? Where are the similar backgrounds, similar success factors across different cultures? Maybe Vanessa. Very difficult question.
I think when it comes to the operation and the managing the new setups, still when we look at companies in China and the retail and luxury, they are 10, 15 years, 20 years the max. And we are not comparing to a mature operation when we go to Italy, to Germany, to France, where we talk about centuries of tradition. So I think one of the major challenges when it comes to talent is the merging of the local and the foreign management style. So for our clients is to have a management team which is mixed between many of them French, Italians, Americans, in the locals. And again, it comes to locals who are stable, who are for a reasonable price. In Brazil, for example, you could see at Ames the highest salaries for locals. Higher than India, higher than China, higher than Russia. So Brazil is really a market where the prices for local talent are really over the top. In China it is, but amazingly enough, Brazil is even higher, at least from our angle. When we go to experience as well, it comes to the depth. Because yes, in our emerging markets, in this new market, you don't have the depth. You have as well many experienced executives or professionals who are very jumpy. So if they go from company to company, the depth is never there. So when we execute projects for CEOs Asia or for, let's say, operations, retail operations Asia, depth is critical, whether they speak the languages. And then the next thing is, are they reasonable as well on their expectations? Because normally as well are over the top versus what they bring to the table. So hands-on is as well a major issue, especially in Asia, whether they are just building up a kingdom and not really going into the floor. And for all of us in the retail, it's the floor where the money is coming from. So I think this is a very critical area where the Western expectations towards what is available and what can you make with it. So I think this is an issue. When we have as well European customers, one of the perceptions and old perceptions is these emerging markets are still cheap. cases as well not the case. So today you have many local Chinese, Brazilians, Indians who are earning the same as the European. So, or an American. So I think it's really to understand the market has changed. The market has evolved. And the revenues are there, but of course the people who are making the revenues are willing to take part of that.
I'm still a little bit concerned with what you said in the beginning, that the classical concept which seems for me to drive the organizational approaches in traditional corporations, like let's cut the world into different regions. There are some regions which are more mature, others are less mature, but the concept is not really right. That's essentially what you said, right? So let's look at how do organizations really take this? Because if it was really about channels and the opportunities, would it make sense to go for a centralized unit which says we take care of worldwide all upcoming new opportunities, no channel opportunities, and centralizing the learning across different cultures rather than going one by one into different countries? Peter, what about you?
My experience, not worldwide experience, not our fellow speakers here. My experience is more in China and Hong Kong and so on. I just want to follow up on the topics again, on the emerging markets and luxury goods. I'd rather look at it at a different angle. I'd rather call it old money and newly rich. China is rich to a certain extent, and amount, a group of people. Of course, a lot of the population is still very poor, but that number of rich people in China is so big that it's larger than any other countries or any other developed countries in the world. But then they're newly rich, so they have a lot to learn from the old money. Culture, heritage, style. So their desire for luxury goods much bigger than the old money society. That's why in what we call emerging markets, or what I would like to call newly rich, their growth in luxury market will be much bigger. And it's a pity if we don't look at it that way.
Please.
I'd also like to totally endorse what Peter was talking about there. But also, Christian, I think the interesting thing that I've seen is the speed of change. Because I think here in emerging markets, and I think in particularly in China, things happen so quickly. And you know, I remember 20 years ago when I was a poor student, and I actually backpacked across China with a backpack, and I stayed in some very, very cheap youth hostels and worked, you know, traveled around China. I remember going into the Friendship store in Beijing, and that was the height of luxury, you know, being able to buy some Western, you know, goods and chocolates, and I think of my experiences back then, which is in a relatively short space of time, 20 years ago to today. The rapid speed of change has been phenomenal. It's been amazing. And I think that's what we've also got to remember in these emerging markets, is that things do change very, very quickly. And in some cases, the consumers are way ahead of some of those brands. So don't get left behind. I mean, I think that's a key message. And be prepared to do new things.
I think here you see clients, especially in the retail arena, the fashion retail, where they are opening a store every month. And here's the case of one of our clients, Gucci, they open one store every month. So where did you see that fast growth? It's all about the speed. And as well, where did you get all the operation systems, the maturity of the management, and as well the staff to run those stores in all those second and third tier cities, which is a huge struggle for all of them, how to train them, how to monitor them, and as well how to coordinate the potential pitfalls or the service as well, which is where this is an issue on those second.
So what's different in terms of organizational structure, how to set up the organizations to really serve those markets successfully?
So this is just what we discussed. For example, I mean, the old style to have an headquarter in Germany with sales, marketing and product management, and then to have some engineers who understand the big US markets and then has a little bit of an impression of Asia, I believe this not works anymore. And this is the biggest challenges, because the shifting of the market shares are so quick on the overall world. And I believe that the headquarter approach of, at least of the European companies, will not work in the future anymore. Yeah? And this is not working that, let's say, the head of product management or creative director flies a few times to Asia to get an impression what's going on. I believe that the people have to live in different kind of the worlds, at least the senior management. And if you look on companies, they have at least 2 or 3 headquarters, and the senior management are living 1 week in Asia, 1 week in the States, and to really recognize what's going on. And I believe this is the biggest challenge of what's coming on.
Armando said the product is a hero luxury. So the question then is, to what extent is it truly possible to sustain with local products, or do we all end up by fully localizing the products to local consumer behavior, which are then subject to fast changes?
I believe always in global products. Yeah? I always believe that if you are a brand, you have to stick to a global approach in terms of product quality and product philosophy. We have the discussion back and forth in terms of big branding, small branding, and if you look how in China the consumer behavior is changing, that they also not only look for the big branding on the products. This is not what you should, as a brand, who follow a worldwide approach. But what is the global product? Is the global product a product who fits for the Europe, or is the global product who fits for Asia? I think this is the future question what has to be asked. Yeah, I don't believe that we need, as a brand, different kind of products for different kind of the world. But we have to have a global product, and we have then to take the fact that this product works better in some kind of the world.
Do you also do this, localizing, adapting in your business?
I do that in our group. We do jewelry for US, Europe, and for now we do retail in China. I totally endorse that. You have to have your brand identity. You need to have that differentiation in order to do a brand. And then, of course, there may be certain product that suits one particular market better than the others, but you cannot sacrifice your global brand in order to suit just one small group. You have to maintain that global image.
But I believe, just to add, is that a brand is not a fixture. It's more a comet who have to be guided for the future. And this is much more fast going than in the past. Yeah? You have to be careful as a brand, yeah? In which you have to drive the brand. You cannot stick like it is in 10 years ago, and now it's not 10 years ago, it's 1 year for the next. You have to develop your brand, and this has to be influenced by, of course, all the world markets.
I mean, what you said challenges, of course, the structure of traditional luxury brands, which tend to be
position of brands. So I would not be surprised if we see a lot more acquisitions of brands. And we're already starting to see that. And I think yesterday I saw in the newswires that there was a new acquisition or an acquisition by one of the Chinese groups of a yacht brand. So we are going to see, I think, one of the trends being acquisition of brands and bringing those brands to those emerging markets like China, and then developing a marketing strategy around some of those brands.
Yeah, correct. I think what we need to consider in Asia is that the power in from China to down is in Chinese hands. So Indonesian, the power is in Chinese Indonesians. If you go to Thailand, there are many Chinese Thai. And you see it as well throughout the region. It's not just China, but there is those ethnic Chinese groups which have grown into a huge power position. And we see as well with our customers setting up more design teams here, and you see as well having collections for the Chinese Asian customers. So you see more and more, you see as well in many of them separating China from Asia Pacific. So the same thing that many years ago happened with Japan, where Japan is an entity, it's a country, it's like US is standing alone, Japan is standing alone, now China is standing alone as well from many of the luxury groups. It's not anymore part of the Asia Pacific region. So we see a change, and we as well have companies where they are as well thinking about their 2020 strategy, and they say maybe we don't have a world headquarters anymore in Germany, we would have to move it to China. So this is as well a vision which is not for the next 5 years, but many of them are aware that they will have to take dramatic changes in the way they manage.
But then, if we meet next week in Brazil, we might have the same discussion in Brazil, right? And say, look, Brazil is such an important market, and there's other Latin American markets. Why don't we set up another headquarter over here? And then the question is, do we become different brands, or differentiated network of brands? And where's the learning? Where's the learning between those different regions? Is there any learning?
There are a lot of learnings, but at this point of time, everything separated. There is not an entity or a business unit for emerging or fast developing markets. There is not, that I'm aware. Most of them are by geographical location, but not really by fast growing revenues or fast growing development. So to share that learning.
I mean, that's exactly one of the central findings of this economist study that I referenced in the beginning. They said it's about time, it makes sense to really have a different look at the world and to separate this more stable, steady-going business from the more dynamic, fast-growing business, which might include new channels, as you described at the beginning. What's your take on that?
Christian, just going back to the BRICS, if we look at the BRICS economies of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and the S, to include South Africa. But with the BRICS economies, I think the issue, they're at different stages of their evolution. And I have to say, quite frankly, China is way ahead of some of those other BRIC economies. And as I mentioned, I was in Brazil last month. And Brazil, you know, that's very much a natural resources play right now. You know, there is the development of that retail marketplace, but it is quite slow. The same thing with Russia, it's a natural resource play. In India, you know, India is a very interesting marketplace. India has got so much potential, but it has some serious regulatory issues. You know, there's been a lot of toing and froing about allowing those foreign brands into India. And, you know, right now, there's still a debate going on with the Indian government about allowing more of those multinational retail brands into India. You know, the great thing about being here in China is that we've got over those hurdles. You know, multinational brands, you know, they are allowed into China, and they're allowed to have wholly foreign-owned enterprises here in China. So it's that evolution of the brands, and I think you know, China is way ahead of some of those other BRIC economies. Of course, the other interesting thing, I think, as we touched on earlier today, is the propensity for the Chinese to travel overseas as well. You know, that's a remarkable, you know, number of people that millions and millions of people that are looking to travel overseas every year. I was in Brazil, as I said, a month ago, and I was in Rio de Janeiro, and I was checking into the Copacabana Palace Hotel, and all I could hear was putonghua. I heard a little bit of Cantonese as well, okay, so sikonoa, sushi. But I did hear, and that's, so I was on the cable car to Sugarloaf Mountain, and all I could hear in the cable car was putonghua. And I think that's the important point here, Christian, is that the fact that, in those economies, we're seeing the Chinese, if you like, lead the way. And, in terms of those overseas, the overseas travel. And that number is growing exponentially. I was in Hong Kong last Friday, and my son twisted my arm to go to the Apple store in Hong Kong, and they had their sale in the Apple store. And the queues, there were hundreds and hundreds of people. But again, it was full of our mainland brothers and sisters who were queuing up for all of those Apple products. So again, I think there's different levels, if you like, in terms of the evolution of retail.
Yeah, so in terms of these, what we call before emerging markets or new channels, China is certainly at the driving edge, the leading edge, and this thereby could also very well drive the organizational development and the thinking, the change, the transformation, the change process, and the management thinking that you've highlighted at the beginning, Jürgen. So let's look at the traditional luxury brands in China, which have very powerful operations already, which are opening one store or even two stores a day. I've seen another brand opening up 2 stores the same day. If you look at and I'm sorry, I have to ask you again, Anthony, if you look at their China operation, do you have the feeling that is already the second headquarter, or do you think it's a remote office, it's a local entity? Is it the same level, peer level of power or not?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the brands have realized that they have to send their brightest and best people to places like China. And I think that they've already got past that point, Christian. In fact, that the brightest and best from these global brands are now all coming to China. One of the other interesting things is that one of the things that we are seeing perhaps more of the operation side of things. We're seeing more global people based here in China now, and I'm sure Vanessa will bear that out in terms of just the numbers on the recruitment front. I was talking to a couple of other friends in recruitment, and they were telling me that in banking and financial services, it was down. But in consumer and retail, they were seeing extraordinary levels of recruitment taking place.
Yeah, exactly. This is exactly what we see especially like you say, 10 years ago, when I came here, more than 10 years ago, you would see retired young interns coming to the companies. And today you are changing into global roles and really the best of the best for the marketplace. It's about time, and they know they have to rush for it. So we have many more foreigners, and as well at a certain point, China got into a localization trend where the companies should be fully localized, and this is now back again to having truly global organizations and really not just a Chinese organization, but a truly global organization.
Christian, I was also going to add, it's not just about the established global brands. I think, John, you can bear me out here. One of the things that we've seen is the emergence of a lot more of the niche brands that all want to be in China.
Like, for an example?
Well, there's a lot of companies that we're dealing with, without going into names, but I think we are, we're really starting to see a lot more of these niche brands develop, and they want to be here in the China marketplace.
We have an example, for example, Moncler. I think many of you are familiar with the brand. It's a French origin, Italian-owned company. And they had a distributor before. They took over the distributor, and now it's 100% owned under Moncler, and then it's just going with a very fast, aggressive expansion. Yeah? So it's not only the super big groups like PPR, Richmond, and so forth, but you see more and more of those niche brands when it comes to jewelry, to fashion, and even lifestyle.
Yeah, Christian, the other interesting thing, even if we don't look at go below the luxury brands, one of the interesting things that we're also starting to see is just a lot of these kind of mid-range fashion apparel brands that are really now starting to ramp up here in places like China. And I think maybe this is the one point where I can be a little bit controversial. I was in Europe in December, and again, talking to a number of the brands, and a number of the brands that I spoke to said that they were closing stores in Europe with a focus to redirect capital to emerging markets like China. So a number of these brands had already embarked on this program of consolidating their store numbers in Europe and actually focusing, and a number of these guys, I mean, even with Gap, let's say Gap for an example, Gap announced that they were going to close 158 stores in North America, but guess what? They've announced an aggressive store opening plan for China.
And it goes as well related, not in the case of Gap, but when it comes to luxury, to stock. So in many cases, some of the clients, they don't have enough products in Asia. So they are shifting the merchandise from those mature markets and giving them with smaller amounts, because here they don't even finish the season, they don't even reach the sales when they already run out of the merchandise.
But you're describing a big issue for the luxury brands, because many luxury brands are not, I'm not talking about the premium industrial like fashion brands. I'm talking about the luxury brands which are driven by craftsmanship, which tend to be smaller, mid-sized companies. Italy is full of mid-sized companies, Germany as well, France. You mentioned Moncler, so it's quite capital intensity to get into this market. You need to be fast and local organizations. Do you think that this part of the luxury culture, I mean, these more family-oriented mid-sized companies truly have an opportunity of growing into the market, or do you think this part of luxury culture will stay in Europe essentially?
Strongly see them coming, whether they are with their own funds or partnering with private equity firms. A lot of them are going into partnerships with private equity groups to have the capital.
So what would your recommendation be for us? Let's look at the giants, okay, but let's look at those mid-sized companies. We talked about wines, perception of the wine, appreciation for the wine culture developing. A lot of vineyards are rather smaller companies. They don't have maybe the capital. What would be your recommendation of how to go to this lead emerging market, China?
I think John put up a number of slides in his presentation. And I think in China, you still have a number of opportunities in terms of the channels. But I also go back to Vanessa's point about one of the things that we are seeing, and we're discussing with a lot of those private equity houses as well, in terms of making those capital investments. And interestingly enough, here in China, there is a dearth of capital available. We've seen a lot of homegrown venture capital, private equity players, and they're all very interested in the consumer market space, dealing with the consumer. So I certainly say that that's certainly one area. One investment strategy is you work with those partners like the VC guys, the private equity guys. Again, finding good partners in China. There's still a lot of Chinese groups that embrace those brands, Christian. And we have a number of big Chinese conglomerate groups who are always looking to work with well-established family brands. Or, of course, you can go it alone. You know, I mean, as I said, you know, you have an increasing number of players that do want to set up those wholly foreign-owned enterprises. They see China as a great market potential. The one thing I would say is that China, in my mind, has always been a long-term play. Yeah, don't think that you're going to come here and crack the market in a short period of time and make lots and lots of money. But I'd like to get Peter's view as well.
I'd like to share our company's experience with the convenience store. We've been in jewelry business for a long, long time, and we actually only started the retail business in China some 6 years ago. So in that regard, we are a newcomer, we're a new brand in China. So how we start? Of course, do all your research, do all your planning, everything you have to do. That's it. But the first, like the thing that everybody we tried is that, number one, you have to be fast. Don't think you can start 2 shops here, 3 shops here, and let them grow and let them make money and then start to do it. You have to plan for sufficient coverage right at the beginning. You have to be prepared to have sufficient coverage right at the very beginning. We opened 100 shops in 2 years' time. Very aggressive. And first, it may not be that profitable. You have to build up your brand, you have to build up your clientele, but you have to be consistent. You determine your brand identity, you determine the differentiation, you think you have the right product, go for it. Quick, fast, consistent. We prepare with a deep pocket. But if you can satisfy all those 3, and if your product is right, your marketing is right, you will be handsomely rewarded. We have more than 200 shops now in China in 6 years' time, and all profitable.
So Jürgen, I'm really curious to hear what you're thinking now. Once you've heard 2 years, 100 shops, are we going to see 100 shops of Porsche Design Group in the next 2 years?
We have, I think, worldwide 132 shops, and so yes, I believe, let's say, if you know what you are doing, you can go fast. But I think don't overestimate the potential of the big markets. Still, the US is by far the biggest luxury markets, and everybody knows US business is quite difficult. It's always a lot of potential to losing money in the States. And I saw a lot of companies who go to the US because everything is so big, everything is great, and at the very end of the day they lose money. So it depends very much. I believe, I mean, you're coming from Hong Kong, so you really know what's China out. We are since 6 years in retail at all, so we have not that experience on a global basis, so we are quite carefully open stores. And for example, also very much important for us as a brand, what we recognize, what we are working on Europe this year, because you have to be in the big places in Europe, like Paris, like Milano, otherwise you will not be successful as a luxury brand in China. This is a special situation for us, and I think also for some other brands, because and this is the Chinese and all the customers are getting global. And the US business, which was great last year, was very much driven by the Latin American market. All the Brazilian and Mexican customers drove the business in the States. So always look very deeply inside the figures. The States has a great increase in the last year, but very much driven from Brazil, from Mexican, because there is not that many stores available like, for example, in China. And this is, I believe, so So we will be carefully. We try to open the headquarters, a subsidiary this year in China to develop it. We have still, China is the biggest market in terms of the number of the stores for Porsche Design, but not for the size of the business in total.
Porsche Design or Porsche?
Porsche Design.
Porsche Design, okay. So, but we clearly see two different cultural approaches. One that I personally, as the CEO of Meissen, also subscribe to. We have to be more careful because we have also to balance the investment. It's about authenticity. I saw that on your slide. The key thing is about authenticity of the brand. Therefore, we need to have a strong base, strongly rooted in the European countries. On the other hand, there's the need derived from the market requirement to go in and to establish with a certain aggressiveness the brand perception. So in principle,
Lost a lot of money.
yeah, but you need to be committed to lose a lot of money, and if that's the message to your group CEO, you might be challenging to communicate. So last question: if there are European companies, luxury brands, which are big brands but still carefully and more following a step-by-step approach, doesn't that mean that there's a tremendous opportunity for growing up Chinese luxury brands? Because in a way, they could start very quickly in bypass, right? What's your perception on this?
Christian, what I've seen in the marketplace, interestingly enough, I was talking to our friends at Pernod Ricard, and you know, they've got a couple of different approaches to the market. Of course, they are building up their premium brands, but they're also looking at other brands regionally, you know, in the marketplace, and they have now acquired a couple of brands. I think they've also recently signed an MOU with Yao Ming, because there's a Yao Ming brand of wine, and you know, they're looking to market that. You know, so obviously for those European brands, American brands as well, I'd say that there are a lot of opportunities to help develop the local brands as well. We've seen this in our report last year, where we interviewed Shangsha, and Shangsha was the Hermes invested business, and you know, so again, I'm sure we are going to see a number of the brands look at working with some of those local brands, because let's face it, the craftsmanship. You know, China, of course, has been famous in the last 10, 20, 30 years for mass production. But even within China as well, there is some very, very good craftsmanship in certain areas. And I remember talking to John R. at Shangsha, and one of the things that she was very passionate about was to make sure that we remember that China has also got a great history for craftsmanship as well. So I think we are going to see that, Christian. We are going to see the global brands working with some of those local brands. And as I said earlier on, my prediction is that we are going to see a lot more of those Chinese companies shopping for global brands to bring back into the market here.
I think it's the same example with Shangsha. Hermes is our client in China and in Asia. And then when we went called for the Shangsha support, it was a completely different angle to what we had before. But it's again the same heritage, the design, the handcrafted, and the unique pieces, which are Chinese, ethnical Chinese. They are not French, they are not Italian, they are ethnical Chinese. And it's something that it is working. And you see normally as well, Hermes is really leading this kind of moves. But then as well, we have another client, which is Powerland, which you see it everywhere in the airports when you came here. It's a Chinese brand, and listed in the DAX in Frankfurt lately. And again, it's one of the largest it's luxury Chinese handbag retailers. So
So we're over 0000, which is good news because it means we're ready for lunch. Let me just thank you, Vanessa, Jürgen, Peter, and Anson for the contribution, and thanks to your attention. All the best. Bye-bye.